The Adventures of Wren and the Magic Walnut. Written by Radin. Narrated by Kevin Wilson. Chapter 1. Wren leaves his old life. In the great kingdom of Lansamaros, in one of the northern port cities along the ocean coast, there lived a young man named Wren. He made his living mending boats. Wren woke happily every morning and worked diligently. He was loved by all, and his boss trusted him enough that he put Wren in charge of the business's finances. Wren lived on his own. His only family were his neighbors and friends, the 80-year-old Con and Shanna. Wren would visit them and mend Con's old boat, which broke apart often. The couple would invite Wren to dinner and share their humble meals with him. At night, when he was asleep, Wren would lie in bed and dream of the moment he would board one of the ships he used to mend and go sailing around the world. But dark times were ahead. The boss who appreciated Wren was replaced by a greedy and mean-spirited man named Mr. Kazabi. This new manager accrued great debts. In an attempt to escape them, he accused Wren of stealing from the business, driving him to poverty and ruining his name. For weeks, Wren looked for work at the docks, but to no avail. No one would hire him. His friends Con and Shanna helped him as much as they could, but eventually, Wren had to sell everything he owned. He was left with nothing. One day, he was walking along the docks with Con and saw a ship in the distance. Perhaps they need someone who mends boats, he thought. He turned to his friend. Con, could you take me to that ship over there? He asked.
I can, replied Con, but I'm afraid that's a pirate ship. Are you sure you want to go there?
I have no choice, my friend, Wren said. They boarded a small boat and sailed quietly until they reached the ship. As they drew near, the head of a bearded sailor appeared over the rail.
What do ye want? He barked.
I need a job, said Wren. I can do anything you need.
Wait there, the sailor said,
and disappeared. A few minutes later, he returned and signaled to Wren to come aboard. Wren and his friend hugged.
Good luck, my boy,
Con said. Wren boarded the ship. Chapter 2. From Pirate Ship to the Palace. It was indeed a pirate ship, under the command of a seasoned pirate, Captain Palombus. Wren was hired to do the repair work, the cooking, and cleaning. He didn't really want to be working with pirates and decided that as soon as he saved enough money, he would leave the ship to find his fortune far from them. Wren was a diligent worker, and from dawn till dusk, his hands were never idle. The pirates, who were not the most amicable people, treated Wren with respect. The truth was that eventually he also began to like some of the pirates who, despite their nature, were mild-mannered people. Wren saw Captain Palombus only a few times, as the captain rarely left his room and delivered his orders through his deputy Koroshka, who would report back to him what was happening on the ship. Wren spent the spring and summer months aboard the ship. As winter drew near, there were fewer ships at sea, so the pirates set out less and less frequently. The weather kept growing colder, and the winter that arrived was harsher than those before it. The loot gathered in the summer dwindled further and further. The crew's meals became meager, and the pirates, who were irritable as it was, became even more irritable, and brawls broke out often. Forks, knives, and plates flung in the air, aimed at the head of one pirate or another, became a daily spectacle aboard the ship. During those times, Ren tried to do his work more quietly than usual. Having earned and saved a decent sum, he knew that in just a few months he could start his new life, far away from the pirates. During those days, Captain Palombus would sit in his secluded cell, pondering over a problem, racking his mind in an attempt to find a solution to the situation. Following night after sleepless night, an idea finally came to him. He gathered the pirates and presented it to them.
"Friends," he began, "I have a daring plan that can save us from our dire situation."
The pirates looked eagerly at the captain.
"You must have all heard of the treasure of the king and queen of Lansamaros," Palombus continued.
Yes, the pirates growled.
"Everyone speaks of a mysterious treasure, and none knows what it is. I know that there is no smoke without fire, and there is a grain of truth to every rumor. I am willing to wager my golden teeth that this is something tremendous, a real fortune."
The captain turned silent before adding,
"If we manage to get a hold of the treasure, we will never have to worry about our livelihoods ever again."
The pirates looked at one another, dumbfounded. Ren listened curiously.
"This time, we shall assume a different way of working. The plan is to send one of you to work at the palace and find the treasure. The rest of us shall join in when needed."
The expression of surprise on the pirates' faces turned to shock. None dared volunteer for the job, and the truth was that none of the veteran pirates seemed like people fit to go past the palace gates. They were all dirty and lacked both teeth and manners. Only Ren was different.
"This young boy can do it,"
the captain said at last, looking at Ren. It was the first time the captain had spoken to him. "But I'm not interested," Ren stuttered. He looked at the captain with a pleading expression, thinking about his plans to leave the ship. But the captain left him no choice.
"You are our only chance, my boy. We shall help you. You need not worry."
Palombus patted Ren on the shoulder, then pulled him closer to whisper in his ear.
"And woe betide you if you try to deceive us."
Palombus lifted Ren's hand and held it up high.
"Success! Gold! Boons!"
the captain cried out with a wide grin. Ren made a great effort to smile, but only managed to make himself look sadder. None of the pirates noticed. They were all cheering, "Yes! Yes! Yes!" Ren managed to see the twinkling of golden teeth through the captain's grin. He knew he could not run away from his mission now. "I still don't have enough money to go far and start a new life," he thought sadly to himself. The next day, the pirates dressed him up in new clothes and combed his hair. In a small boat, they brought him to the dock near the city where the king and queen resided. Deputy Karashka bid Ren farewell.
"Don't forget your instructions. Half your wages and a note every 2 weeks."
Karashka gave Ren an intimidating look and added,
"We'll make sure you don't disappear."
He started turning the boat to the sea.
"Good luck, lad. I hear the king and queen are truly wicked."
He let out a big, toothless laugh and looked away to the sea. With a heavy heart, Ren turned away and walked toward the palace. He too had heard of the wickedness of the king and queen. They were hated by the people for their luxurious lives and for the heavy taxes they had imposed on the common people. They cared little for the commoners and punished severely anyone who objected to their harsh rule. Ren reached the palace gate and asked to come in. "I am an experienced servant and willing to do any work." Fortunately, the royal kitchen needed a servant. Ren set to work. Despite his earlier concerns, he became liked by almost all. In particular, the head of the kitchen took a shine to him and began to consider giving the hand of his daughter, a palace laundry maid, in marriage. Ren, for his part, stuck to his plans, saving money so he could leave the palace as soon as possible. At the same time, he tried to find clues about the treasure, and he dutifully sent the pirates money from the wages he earned, as they had demanded, along with coded messages saying, "Nothing new." He walked anywhere he could without arousing suspicion, while gently forming connections with some of the palace workers who had grown accustomed to his presence. He chatted with the gatekeepers and the stable boys and befriended them, and they told him stories about the king and queen, all of them about their great cruelty. He heard from them about the snake and scorpion cages into which they threw the poor people who did not please them. The kingdom of Lansamaros was surrounded by enemies, and anyone who was suspected of collaborating with them was thrown into those dreadful prisons. Of the two, the queen was known as the most wicked. Ren tried to glean from his friends some information about the treasure in the palace, but they all said, "It's just an old legend." One evening, as he was sitting near the servants' quarters, he saw the princess, the daughter of the king and queen, for the first time. His heart skipped a beat. He had never met any royals before, and this one was particularly beautiful, although she seemed irritable. Ren was embarrassed, but soon came to his senses and bowed before her. The princess glanced at him and blurted angrily, "How did I get here?" She turned back and walked away quickly. Ren continued to look at her, hoping he would see her again. Chapter 3. The Queen's Savior. 6 weeks had passed since Ren came to the palace. He repeated his predictable daily routine, gradually earning enough to reach the sum he needed to make his plans come true and finally go out to walk in the world. He had discovered nothing about the treasure, and he too began to believe it was a mere legend. He yearned to leave the kingdom of Lansamaros for the neighboring kingdom to the south. But lo, there came a day to, once again, change his plans. That morning, it became known in the kitchen that the servant who served the family their meals was ill. The head of the kitchen, who tried especially hard to be kind to Ren, suggested that he take that role for a few days. Ren was very happy for this opportunity to get some fresh air outside of the kitchen and see the royal family in the flesh. He remembered the princess and was waiting for a chance to see her again. That day, lunch was served at the palace gardens. Ren went out to the garden carrying a steaming, heavy pot. He walked towards the dining table where the king, the queen, and their daughter were sitting. When he was 2 steps away from the table, he suddenly stopped and threw the pot powerfully onto the lawn. It fell with a loud noise, almost hitting the queen's foot, and the food spilled onto the lawn, spraying Ren's and the queen's clothes. The royal family jumped up, startled, and the king, his face red with shock and fury, shouted, "What on earth are you?" Ren carefully lifted the lid, underneath which there was a dead snake. "Oh!" the king, queen, and princess cried out together. "It's a snake!" "How did it get here?" the queen asked in shock. "Perhaps it escaped from the cage," the king wondered. "You saved my mother's life, kind sir," the princess said, and smiled at Ren. Ren stuttered, embarrassed. I am but a mere servant," he said, thinking to himself that she was even more beautiful when she smiled. "Fetch the head of cages at once," the king commanded. The queen, flustered, turned to Ren. "How can I thank you?" she asked. Ren could not even answer before the man in charge of the cages arrived, accompanied by 2 soldiers. The man fell to his knees, trembling and crying, and begged for his life. "Please forgive me, your majesty. I do not know how that happened. Such a horrible thing. It has never happened to me before. Please." The queen looked away in derision and ordered, "Put him in the cage with his pets. Perhaps they are hungry." "Your majesty," Ren suddenly said quietly, "cast him out of the palace. That is how you can thank me." The queen looked at Ren, astounded by his boldness, and was already considering throwing him in the snake cage too. But her daughter rested her hand on the queen's and said, "Mother, this servant saved your life. Listen to him." "Very well," the queen said, placated. "I will think about what should be done with you," she told the head of cages. In the meantime, throw him in jail, she commanded, and sighed in irritation. Well then, my heart makes me risk my life for worthless beings such as him. Wren bowed before their majesties and returned to the kitchen. By that evening, all of the palace's residents had heard of the heroic Wren who had saved the queen and the head of cages. Anyone who met him greeted him warmly, and the head of the kitchen shook his hand, seizing the chance to tell him that his daughter would be glad to meet him whenever he was available. Wren politely said he would try to find an appropriate time. Shortly before dinner, a messenger on behalf of the king and queen arrived, bearing a missive addressed to Wren, signed with the royal seal. It said, "You are hereby invited to the tea room at 8 o'clock." Wren rushed to his room, put on a clean uniform, and headed out for the first time from the servants' ward to the palace rooms. It was also the first time he had ever walked around a palace. It was all so big and so magnificent. A gentle breeze seeped through the large windows, stroking his face, and the moon gently lit his way. The heavy curtains moved slowly, and Wren, who since he arrived had lived mostly in the darkened kitchen rooms, relished this short walk to the tea room. At the door stood a sentry. He knocked on the door and announced Wren's arrival. Wren breathed deeply and entered the tea room. The king and queen had been waiting for him, sitting on wide, padded armchairs. "Please, have a seat," the queen invited. Wren took a seat on a comfortable orange armchair. "Well, young man, the king and I would like to reward you for saving my life," she said. "And that, of course, is in addition to the extraordinary gesture I performed at your request for the sake of the head of cages." "Your Majesty," Wren said, "your kindness and generosity are indeed extraordinary." "We believe," the queen continued, "that you deserve to be in a different position." For a moment, Wren feared he would replace the man in charge of poisonous insects. But the queen said, "From now on, you shall be my personal assistant." Wren was shocked by the announcement. He had not expected such a tremendous promotion. "The previous assistant left his position several days ago," the queen said, making Wren wonder what had become of him. "And I need someone like you." Wren stood up, flustered, and bowed before the king and queen. "I hope you will be satisfied with me, your Majesty." "The head of palace finances will meet you tomorrow to prepare you for your role," the queen added. "And yes, you will receive a monetary reward for your heroic deed. He who saves the queen receives a worthy reward. But remember, he who disappoints the queen receives what he deserves as well." "Of course, your graceful Majesty," Wren replied, bowing again. The king poured wine into 3 glasses and gave one to Wren. "Good luck," he said, and the 3 sipped the wine. It was the best wine Wren had ever tasted. "Now go and prepare for the morrow," the queen ordered, and Wren left the room with a pounding heart. That night, he could not fall asleep. He rolled around in his bed, angry at himself as once again he could not leave, although he had almost reached the sum he needed. He was also afraid of the queen's wickedness and power and did not dare disobey her. He hoped that at the very least he would finish his service with his head still attached to his shoulders. Chapter 4. Getting Close to the Royal Family. The following day, Wren started his new job and his new life. He bid his friends from the kitchen farewell and moved into a room of his own among the senior palace servants. From that moment on, Wren spent most of his day at the queen's side. From dawn until dusk, he accompanied her or tended to errands on her behalf. He carried her cape, wrote her daily agenda for her, and reminded her what would happen every hour of the day. He was also in charge of the royal menu, and fairly often, to his embarrassment, he had to meet the head of the kitchen, who now frowned at him once he understood that the possibility of betrothing his daughter to Wren was less and less likely. Wren accompanied the queen on her trips for both royal and personal matters. He visited many palaces throughout the kingdom and met military men and nobility, watched sporting events and presentations of flowers, fashion, and animals from all over the world. There were things he disliked, such as the queen's habit of watching the executions she had ordered, as she wanted to make sure her orders were taken seriously. Fortunately for him, he was not requested to accompany her to such events. Wren loathed the queen and yearned for the day when he would be free from the palace and the pirates. Outside of her husband and her homestead, there was no one in the kingdom who did not fear the queen, and none who loved her. Wren followed her orders accurately and politely and kept her company. The queen was satisfied with him, and having spent a month with him by her side, she began to trust him as well. Wren worked hard and was rewarded generously. He had still learned nothing about the mysterious treasure and kept sending the pirates encoded messages saying, "I haven't discovered anything yet." Every few weeks, one of the pirates appeared near the palace to make sure he was still there. Wren retained his agreeable relationship with the palace workers he met when he had been a servant in the kitchen. He always treated everyone with respect and gave a helping hand when needed, and they, in turn, appreciated him and remembered his generosity. He could not discover anything about the treasure from his friends, who kept replying, "Yes, everyone talks about that, but it's just a legend." On occasion, Wren and the queen were accompanied by Princess Lily-El. When the three of them were together, the two youths avoided talking to each other. One day, they traveled to meet a horse merchant in a nearby village. The queen departed for a trial ride on a horse she was interested in buying, leaving Wren and Lily-El alone to wait for her. They sat at a small table in the shade of an oak tree, and a servant poured tea for Lily-El from a kettle. He did not offer any to Wren, as he knew he was no nobleman. When he turned away, Lily-El called out to him, "Bring another cup for the master." The servant stopped, and Wren looked down in embarrassment. "Yes, another cup of tea for him," Lily-El repeated politely, looking at Wren. The servant nodded, went off to bring another cup, and then poured some tea for him. "Thank you, Your Highness," Wren said, looking for the first time directly at Lily-El. "You're welcome," she smiled at him. They sipped the tea, and the princess removed her hat and asked, "From whence came you, Wren, if I may ask?" I worked aboard a ship beforehand," Wren stuttered. "Oh, what did you do there?" "Repairing, working in the kitchen." "And have you been to strange, remote places?" she asked, starry-eyed. "Not yet," Wren laughed, "but I plan to." "Really? I also dream of the day when I will be able to leave this place." "But you can you not? You're a princess, after all. You can do as you please." Lily-El let out a sad chuckle. "You would think. I am the least free person living in the kingdom. I am not allowed out of this place without a servant accompanying me, and I am expected to be wed within a year and a half of my 19th birthday. So I do not have, nor will I have in the future, an opportunity to do anything on my own." "And if you did anyway? If you did just as you pleased?" Wren asked carefully. "Then I should break my parents' hearts and risk their lives." "Would they not understand that you were doing what was best for you?" Wren gathered the strength to ask. "Oh, it is so much more complicated," Lily-El sighed. "As you know, for years Lensamaros has had a hostile relationship with its neighboring kingdoms, and people who oppose the regime are everywhere. As I belong to the royal family, I am at risk of being attacked or even kidnapped. This would put my parents in danger, and their regime could collapse. Such an event has already taken place 2 generations ago, when the sister of my mother's grandfather left to travel the world on her own. She was kidnapped by anti-royalists from the neighboring kingdom and was released only after her parents paid the kidnappers a fortune. The entire affair lasted for a few years, and by the time it was over, it had already caused the royal regime a great amount of trouble. My parents made it clear to me that since that incident, a strict law forbids the royal family to leave the palace on their own, and any royal who breaks it would be disowned by the family, never to be allowed back. The princess breathed deeply. So you see, she added, leading an uncomplicated life is not simple. The hours when Lily-El joined Wren and the Queen were his favorites. Lily-El was much nicer than her mother and knew nothing of what her parents did. They managed to hide from her the way they ran the kingdom, and she lived in a world away from the wickedness and cruelty. Never had she met a person who was not of her family's ilk, and innocently believed that the king and queen treated their subjects justly and wisely, and would never punish anyone unless they deserved it. The queen would tell her daughter about the burden that she and the king bore in running the kingdom, and describe the people as ignorant, ungrateful, and unwilling to acknowledge their efforts. Sometimes there's no choice, my child, the queen would complain, and we must react harshly towards those who put our kingdom's security at risk. One day you will witness for yourself just how hard it is to be a ruler. The princess believed her mother's words and lamented her suffering. Princess Lily-El also loved spending time with Wren, the young and handsome boy. She especially loved hearing about his past life, not knowing he had worked on a pirate ship. It had been the first time she had ever gotten to know someone who was not a noble person. Unlike what her parents had told the princess about commoners, Wren spoke wisely, worked diligently, and was even known as the hero who saved the queen's life. He piqued her interest, and she grew fonder and fonder of him every day. Wren, in turn, was head over heels in love with the princess, but knew full well he would never win her hand. He also feared the queen's wrath should he become too close with her daughter, and thus treated her with politeness. He did not dare to ask about the treasure, but thought to himself, if it does exist, your parents do not deserve to own it. The queen, whose keen eye never missed anything, observed her daughter worriedly and saw that Lily-El was falling in love with the commoner boy. Chapter 5, The Great Secret. 15 weeks after Wren's arrival at the palace, his luck changed again. The king went away on a long trip with the princess for several days, leaving the queen alone in the palace. That morning, the queen woke up feeling unwell and summoned Wren to her room. He obeyed and found her pale and tired, sitting on her bed preparing to stand up. "Do stay in bed, your majesty. I shall fetch the doctor," Wren said. He recalled that he had never seen a doctor in the palace, as the royal family had always been well. "No need," said the queen tiredly. "Come here. Let me lean on you." The queen leaned on Wren's shoulder and led him in slow steps to the palace gardens. She approached a hedge, slid her hand into the thick greenery, and moved it aside. She signaled to Wren to pass through the opening she created into an empty space on the other side. She followed, searched about between the hedge's branches, and there found a candle and matches. The queen gave them to Wren and ordered, "Light it." Wren lit the candle and could see an iron door with a keyhole in it. The queen took off a chain she was wearing under her clothing, a simple silver chain on which there were 3 silver keys, a large one, a medium-sized one, and a small one. She tried to turn the large key in the keyhole, but was too frail to do it. She handed the keys to Wren, who opened the iron door, revealing a small room. They entered, and the queen signaled him to lock the door behind them. In the small room, there was only a chair and a closet. The queen sat on the chair, breathing heavily and coughing, and instructed Wren to open the closet. This time, the medium-sized key fit, and the closet opened. Inside it, there was a simple iron chest, and it too was locked. Wren looked at the queen, waiting for her approval. When she nodded, he opened the chest using the smallest key. Inside, there was a sack, which he lifted, feeling that he was holding a rugged, heavy ball. He handed it over to the queen. With trembling hands, the queen laid the sack on her knees and opened it. She pulled out of it what appeared to be some sort of giant walnut, the size of a watermelon. A third of the nut was missing, and the rest was encased in a cracked shell. The queen slipped her fingers into the nut and broke off a crumb the size of a sesame seed. She placed it on her tongue, closed her mouth, and shut her eyes. Within a few seconds, a marvel occurred. The queen stood up, healthy and vigorous as if she had not been ill and frail mere minutes ago. As Wren stood and watched in astonishment, the queen quickly placed the sack back in the chest and locked it with the small key. After that, she locked the closet with the medium-sized one. When they left the room, the queen locked it with the large key. They exited through the hole in the hedge, and from there to the palace gardens. The queen hurried away, followed by Wren, who was in turmoil at what he had seen. At the center of the garden, the queen stopped and said to Wren, "Woe betide you if you ever speak of what you saw here." Yes, your majesty," Wren stuttered. "I am glad to see that you are well." "And now we go back to work," the queen ordered. "I must plan my daughter's birthday party." Wren returned to his work, trying his best to act normally and focus on his tasks while his mind was buzzing with restless thoughts about the wondrous treasure he had finally discovered. A priceless treasure indeed, Wren thought. And those two, angrily thinking of the king and queen, use it only for themselves. They do not deserve it. Wren began to plan his escape from the palace with the wondrous walnut. He would miss Liliel's birthday party, he thought, his gut wrenching at the idea of bidding her farewell. Liliel will probably hate me forever. For a moment, a hint of doubt appeared in Wren's heart. Perhaps he should stay and forsake the plan to steal the treasure. Maybe he and Liliel would... Oh no, she'll surely marry one of the king's noblemen and forget about him. With a heavy heart, he returned to his original plan. And while Wren was busy with his plans, the queen began to arrange for Wren's mysterious disappearance, which would occur without raising anyone's suspicion. Certainly not Princess Liliel's. Chapter 6. Running Away from the Palace. When Wren sat down to have lunch, he opened his napkin and found a picture of a skull and crossbones on it. He realized his life was now in danger. How could I be so stupid, he thought. How could I have thought the queen would let me live after learning of the secret royal treasure? He had received the message from his friend, who had been, up until several years ago, working as a guard at the main gate, but who had now joined the queen's guard. Wren recognized that he had to run sooner than he planned and began to take action. Before supper, Wren dripped a few drops of a sedative potion into the queen's glass of wine. Tonight would be the perfect opportunity to run off with the treasure. The king and the princess would still be out, and the queen would be in a deep sleep. Afterward, Wren went to the stable and asked the groom to prepare a horse for him and tie it outside of the stable. "I shall need it early in the morning," he told him. The request was unusual, but Wren was known to be a friend of the royal stablemaster. Besides, the palace workers had become accustomed to receiving directions from the queen's personal assistant. Shortly after midnight, Wren snuck into the queen's room. He gently removed the chain with the keys on it. The queen slept deeply and did not feel a thing. Quickly, Wren walked over to the hedge, found the opening, lit up a candle he brought with him, and entered the secret room. He opened the closet and then the chest, pulled out the sack with the walnut, locked the chest and the closet, and left the room. Without delay, he quickly turned toward the stable and took the horse that had been prepared for him. Now all that was left for Wren to do was cross through the palace gate. At the entrance, there was a new guard who Wren had yet to befriend. Wren stood up and said confidently, "In the name of the queen, open this gate." The gatekeeper immediately recognized Wren and opened the gate without hesitation. Wren walked the horse, treading calmly out of the castle walls. He waved goodbye to the gatekeeper and began to gallop to the south. After several minutes of riding, he stopped the horse, turned left, and began to gallop towards the docks. When he arrived there, he recognized the pirate ship from afar, docked a few miles off the shore. He came up to a man tying a small boat to the pier. "Could you please take something from me to that ship over there?" he asked, pointing at it. "Certainly," the boat's owner replied. "Hold on to the horse for a moment," Wren asked. He backed away slightly, opened the sack, and chipped a piece off the walnut. He wrote an encoded message on a note saying, "This is the treasure. Eating so much as a crumb can cure any illness instantly." He wrapped the piece and the note in a square of cloth and handed it to the boat's owner, along with a handful of golden coins. "Hand this to the ship's captain," Wren said, pointing at the ship. The man took off in the boat, and Wren watched it making its way to the ship. When the boat was drawing close to the pirate ship, Wren mounted his horse and began to ride farther towards the south of the kingdom. He knew he had to get as far away from the castle as possible. He rode for 3 days and nights straight, stopping only to allow his horse to eat and rest. He reached a mountainous area that was difficult to walk, where the paths were narrow and crooked. He saw on the side of the road an old man lying on the ground with a bloody wound on his leg. Wren stopped, pulled out the walnut, and broke off a crumb the size of a sesame seed, as he had seen the queen doing. "Here, swallow this," he said, placing the crumb in the old man's hand. "This will help you." The old man gave Wren a tired look and swallowed the walnut crumb. Before their eyes, the wound closed up and healed.
"Unbelievable," the old man said. "How did you do that?"
Wren smiled contentedly.
"How can I repay you?"
Wren wanted nothing in return, but it crossed his mind that he would need to hide. "Trade clothes with me," he asked. The old man was astounded, as his own clothes were old and ragged, while Wren's were of fine quality.
"As you wish,"
the old man agreed. They traded clothes. The old man even gave him his hat, and then they went their separate ways. Wren continued to ride for another day on crooked roads until he reached a secluded little village in the middle of a mountain range. He walked into a tea house at the village center and heard that the local language was not the one spoken in his native land. He gathered that he had crossed the border into the kingdom of Gardever. Using gestures, Wren managed to explain to the people there that he was looking for a home. He did not reveal where he had really come from, fearing he would be treated as an enemy. One of the locals rented out to him a small hut at the edge of the village, and Wren settled there, thankful for his good fortune. He knew he was being hunted and hoped that he would now be hard to find. Chapter 7. The Queen finds out about Wren's escape. And indeed, he was sought after. On the morning following Wren's escape, the Queen arose from her slumber, dressed herself, and prepared to head for breakfast. As she was standing before the mirror, she sensed something was missing. She felt around her neck to discover the necklace was gone. Terrified, she began to look for it in her sheets and under the bed. She did not want to ask for anyone's help, lest the existence of the necklace become known. Then she recalled that Wren already knew. She sent a maid for him, but the maid returned within an hour to tell her he was neither in his room nor in the great hall. "Search throughout the palace and ask the rest of the staff to scan the gardens," the Queen ordered. A thought crossed her mind that perhaps Wren's disappearance was related to the chain's disappearance, but she dismissed it. Her suspicions grew as her servants began to return one after another, saying they could not find him. Then came 2 messages that no longer left room for any doubt. The stable master reported that Wren had taken a horse, and the night gatekeeper said that Wren had left the palace. "Traitor!" the queen roared, her face red with fury. She began to march toward the gardens, muttering to herself, "He shall pay for this with his life, that pathetic underling trying to deceive the queen." The maid began to follow after her, but the queen sent her off, irritated. She continued quickly towards the hedge and entered through the secret passage, but the door leading to the treasure room was locked. She still did not want to ask for help, lest she reveal the secret hiding place. She decided to wait for the king, who was to return that afternoon with the princess. In the meantime, she returned to the palace and called the minister of the military and the head of the royal guard. "Send out horsemen and warriors and find Wren," she ordered, "even if you have to search the entire kingdom. And do not kill him," she added. "Bring him to me alive. I do not wish to miss the moment of his execution." Chapter 8. Palombus receives the present. The ship's captain sat at his desk and opened the package. He read the coded note. "This is the treasure. Eating so much as a crumb can cure you instantly." Captain Palombus pushed the walnut away.
"That young boy is either cheating us, or he's a complete idiot."
He began to plan what he would do to Wren upon finding him. Several days later, Deputy Koroshka headed out of the docks. Upon his return, he brought back a poster torn off one of the walls in the city, featuring a drawing of Wren with a caption that read, "Wanted for treason to the kingdom. A monetary reward shall be given to any who can provide information on his whereabouts."
"It's everywhere," Koroshka said. "That bastard took the treasure for himself and didn't share it with anybody."
Captain Palombus was furious. He looked at the thing he had received from Wren, which was still cast aside on the corner of his desk.
"It looks like a portion broken off from a giant walnut," he pondered, staring at it. "Perhaps it's worth putting to the test, but I best not let anyone know what I'm doing, or they'll think I'm an idiot." "Send Morto to me,"
he ordered his deputy. The deputy was bewildered by his request. Morto was a new pirate on the ship, and about a week earlier he had contracted seasickness and could barely move.
"Palombus probably wants to get rid of him too,"
he thought. He found him leaning over the deck's rail, vomiting.
"Palombus sent for you,"
Koroshka said. Morto stared at him, tired and bewildered.
"Come on the double,"
the deputy ordered the man, who was so frail he could barely stand. Morto dragged himself over to the captain's room and knocked on the door.
"Come in,"
Palombus bellowed. Morto walked slowly into the room, his back arched, his face unable to hide his agony.
"He really doesn't look too well,"
the captain thought to himself.
"Take a seat,"
the captain offered. Morto sat down, and the captain asked,
"Are you ill?"
"Yes," Morto replied. "Seasickness. I never thought that would happen to me."
"I'll give you something that might help,"
the captain said. Morto looked at his captain in astonishment. He never would have expected to be noticed by him, let alone receive his help. The captain broke a crumb off the walnut piece and gave it to Morto.
"Swallow this. It might help you."
Morto placed the crumb in his mouth, swallowed it, and asked for a glass of water. The captain turned to pour him some, and when he turned back, he saw Morto standing up, with a calm expression, looking healthy.
"Are you feeling better?"
he asked expectantly. "I feel excellent," the sailor replied. "Sir, you cured me. I don't know how to thank you." The captain began to laugh wildly, ignoring Morto.
"It's true," he exclaimed. "The treasure is in our hands. Wren, you're a genius."
And so he began to plan how he would profit from the wondrous treasure in his hands. Chapter 9. Another new beginning for Ren. In the village, Ren was beginning his new life. He let the royal horse go, which galloped back towards home as horses do. Several days after arriving at the village, while Ren was in his front yard, a father and son passed by him. The boy held his belly and cried, and his father seemed to be trying to console him. Ren signaled them to approach him. He walked into the cabin, took out the wondrous walnut, and chipped off a crumb. Then he came back outside and placed the crumb in the child's mouth. The child swallowed the crumb and felt better in the blink of an eye. The father and his son looked at each other in incredulity. The father fell to his knees and bowed before Ren. He took a few coins out of his pocket and handed them to Ren, who refused to accept them. No. He shook his head and gently patted the father's shoulder. The father and his son walked away, deeply amazed and thanking Ren in their hearts. That evening, Ren found a pot of soup on his doorstep. The following day, when Ren opened his door, there stood 5 people, each with some kind of injury or illness. Ren accepted them all, and one after another, they ate from the walnut and were healed. Each gave him something in return: food, clothing, or some kind of useful item, and one of them even gave him a live chicken to lay eggs. The following day, 10 people were already standing at his doorstep when he awoke. With the walnut's magic, Ren cured them all. With every passing day, the number of people waiting at his door to be cured grew larger. The rumor about the wondrous healer continued to spread, and people from more remote places began to come to see him. Ren stayed in his village hut. His hair grew long, and his beard and mustache grew wild. He continued to wear ragged clothing, and one could no longer recognize him as the young man he was. He began to learn a little of the local language, but rarely spoke with the villagers. Ren had never planned to start such a new life. At times, he would think of his beloved Princess Liliel and dream that he was strolling through the palace gardens with her. For the time being, he did nothing but provide a cure for the ill. Word of the healer continued to be spread far and wide and began to cross borders. Chapter 10. The Secrets of the Walnut. The king and queen continued to search for Ren, but also carried on handling the kingdom's affairs. Almost 2 months had passed since Ren had fled when, to their surprise, a page came to the palace on behalf of the king of Gardevoir, bringing a message for the royal couple of Lansamaros. The message included an invitation to make peace between the 2 kingdoms. The king and queen accepted the offer, and after over 150 years of war between the 2 kingdoms, peace finally reigned once more. All the while, Princess Liliel walked around the palace, sad and disappointed about her beloved, who was revealed to be a fraud. She had never known of the walnut. Only once it had been stolen had her parents told her about this wondrous treasure. Now she remembered that at times when she was ill, her parents would always give her the same medicine, a small grain she swallowed that made her healthy so quickly. When she was a small child, her parents called it the magical medicine. Liliel wanted to hear more about it from her parents, but both the king and especially the queen were so upset about its theft that they refused to talk about it. As time went by, and Ren and the walnut were nowhere to be found, the queen felt she was ready to discuss the matter with her daughter. She called Liliel to her room and told her the story. "The treasure has been passed down in our family for 5 generations, and only those who are fated to receive it know of it," she began. "I meant to tell you about the walnut before my passing, as one should, but now the secret is not in our hands, and we know not if it ever will be again. When my father grew old and I ascended to the throne, he entrusted me with the walnut and told me its story. Before I tell it to you, I must say this. The story is not known in full. Some of its details are missing, and my father told me that the original story has changed over the years. Tell me, the princess said. The queen began. My great-great-great-grandfather, Alionis III, told his children and grandchildren how he had won the walnut, and they passed on the story. Legend has it that Alionis III liked to go out hiking on his own in the kingdom's mountains and forests, and would sometimes walk as far as to cross the borders into our neighboring kingdoms. He persisted in this habit even as a father with grown children. On one of his trips, he was riding through the evergreen forests of Lansamaros. Alionis was always equipped with water, food, and a bow and arrows, which he used solely for self-defense. On that journey, when evening fell, he suddenly felt in danger. He dismounted his horse and began to slowly tread forward. Then, a few steps ahead of him, he saw a tiger stalking its prey. He hid behind thick bushes and saw that the tiger was about to pounce on an old man who was standing up, leaning against a tree and looking calmly at the tiger. Alionis swiftly drew his bowstring and fired an arrow at the tiger. It pierced the tiger's stomach, and the great beast fell and died. Alionis approached the old man and asked if he was all right. The old man laughed and thanked him, still looking, much to Alionis's astonishment, calm and collected. They sat together and drank some wine. The old man knew a bit of Alionis's language, and Alionis knew a bit of the old man's language. The man turned out to be the last descendant of a forest-dwelling tribe who had lived for thousands of years in the forests of Lansamaros and neighboring kingdoms. Alionis could no longer stop from asking, "How do you remain so calm facing that tiger? It was about to kill you." The old man replied, "I knew you would come to my rescue, for I have something important to pass on to you." King Alionis felt confused and was fascinated by the old man. Then the old man showed Alionis the giant walnut and told him of its wondrous abilities. He entrusted the king with it and instructed him how to use it properly. "It can make you a great king or harm you and many others around you. Just use it exactly as I told you." We're told that the king welcomed the old man to come with him to the palace and live a life of respect and splendor. But the old man said his place was in the forest, and that was where he wanted to stay. The queen sighed. From this point on, the story is not so happy. "Please continue," Liliel asked. "When Alionis returned back home," continued the queen, "he told his wife and sons about his extraordinary adventure. About the wondrous walnut, he said, 'This is an invaluable treasure. A crumb of it will cure any sickness and pain. When my dying day comes, I'll tell my heir the rest of its secrets.'" "Can't the walnut prevent death?" asked Alionis's wife, the queen. "No, dear," said Alionis, "but it can prevent pain and suffering." Everybody became silent. "The walnut is a powerful treasure," he added gravely. "We'll have to be careful with it. Meanwhile, I forbid anyone else but me to touch it." King Alionis III lived for only a short time after receiving the walnut. He had 2 mature twin sons who had been fighting for the throne. Each wanted dominion over the entire kingdom for himself once their father was gone. The king told them, "If you do not cease your fighting, I will not be able to bequeath the throne to either of you, nor the wondrous walnut. And I warn you, if you use the walnut without knowing all of its secrets, you will bring harm upon yourself and others." "Tell us the walnut's secrets," the brothers asked. "Not as long as you two occupy yourselves with wars against one another," the king refused. Legend has it that one day a fight broke out between the 2 brothers, and the king intervened to break them apart. During the fight, one of the brothers accidentally struck his dagger in the king's stomach. The king sent his children to bring the walnut, but they didn't return in time, and the king died. Liliel cried out in shock, "Oh, how dreadful!" "Yes," the queen continued, "it was dreadful indeed. The one who killed the king fled the palace, and the other stayed behind. In his hand was the kingdom and all of its treasures, including the wondrous walnut. He guarded it well and used it for the sake of his family before passing it down to his children. And thus the walnut passed from parent to child until it reached me. And what of the walnut's secrets, the one Aliones III spoke of? Were they revealed over the years? Liliel asked. No, the queen replied. The only thing I know is what my ancestors and I have known about the walnut's healing powers. Besides that, we kept the walnut a secret to avoid complications or cause suffering, as Aliones III had warned us. What else do you know of Aliones III? Liliel asked. The queen thought for a moment and said, From the kingdom's chronicles, we know that during his reign the kingdom enjoyed economic prosperity and abundance, and Lansameros has never regained the prosperity of his times. Liliel looked thoughtful. Could it have something to do with the walnut's secrets? She asked. What do you mean? The wars and the poverty, Liliel said. You are saying that since the walnut passed down to Aliones IV, the kingdom has only known wars and poverty. Perhaps it is because we do not know how to use the walnut as we should. She continued enthusiastically. Why, yes, Aliones III himself said that misusing the walnut would cause suffering to oneself and to others. Then how would you explain the peace treaty with Gardever? The queen replied, and the offers we received from 3 kingdoms in the region a few days ago to renew our trade relations? Suddenly, the queen's face turned angry and she added, We must catch that ungrateful little mongrel who stole our treasure. Liliel remembered Ren and became sad again. Deep in her heart, the princess refused to believe that Ren was a heartless traitor and hoped to find him and prove that her mother was wrong. Word of the magical healer spread past the borders of Gardever, where Ren made his home, to the neighboring kingdom of Lansameros that he had fled. When patients came to Ren speaking his own language, he knew that soon the queen would reach him. Where should he flee to now? He was known throughout Gardever, and people would know him wherever he might go, unless he stopped sharing the walnut with others. But he did not want that. He had no time to find a solution. He was busy tending to the many ill who came to him every day, and his wondrous walnut quickly grew smaller and smaller. Chapter 11. The Queen Finds Ren. 7 months had now passed since Ren had left the palace with the walnut. The search for him continued in full force, and in the meantime, life became better and better in the kingdom of Lansameros. Peace offerings and agreements between the kingdoms in the region came one after another. The new state of peace brought about new opportunities for earning a living for the people of Lansameros. The people of the region began to trade with one another, and new life began to flourish in the kingdom. The king and queen began to attend more to improving relations with their neighboring kingdoms and spent less time treating their subjects cruelly. The snake and the scorpion cages no longer contained the miserable people they had once imprisoned. One day, the queen of Lansameros was visiting her friend, the Duchess of Nozeroan, who told her that her husband had departed 5 days before with 2 servants to the kingdom of Gardever to meet a special healer residing there. She complimented her friend, the queen, on the peace treaty with Gardever and for allowing her husband to go there. And what is so special about that healer? The queen inquired. They say he has a special cure that instantly heals any illness or wound, the Duchess told her. My poor husband has been suffering for years from pain in his ears. We've already tried everything else. If this medicine helps, it will be a miracle. The queen began to suspect that perhaps this was what she had been looking for so long. Tell me, she asked, where exactly is this healer to be found? I know not the exact location, but it is a village near the border, the Duchess replied. The queen wanted to act at once. She left her friend's house and ordered the carriage driver to gallop quickly to the palace. When she arrived, she called the king, the princess, and the minister of the military and said, I think I have managed to trace Ren. prepare a horse for me and 10 cavaliers to accompany me. We are going to catch him." "Mother, I shall join you," the princess cried out, and the entourage was on its way. For 4 days they rode. At night they would stop to rest, and during the day they traveled, stopping only for short breaks. On the way, they asked people if they had heard of the magical healer, and the farther south they went, the more people they met who knew of him and his place of residence. When they reached Wren's village, the queen easily recognized his house by the long procession of people stretching from his door. Shortly before the queen arrived, Wren had come out of his house and told the people waiting that the medicine was about to run out and that there might not be enough for everyone. "I ask of you, do not let this be a cause for fights," he said, as he had done each of the past few days when only a small piece of the walnut was left and it appeared that it could run out any day. The queen dismounted. The princess wanted to join her, but her mother instructed her to stay. She walked past the people waiting in line with determination. The crowd murmured in protest at the unfairness. The queen ignored them and walked into the hut without knocking. Wren looked up in surprise and saw the queen. Moments before she entered, he had given away the last crumb to a girl standing by him, with only the shell left in his hand. During the past few days, he had been preparing for the moment when the walnut would run out, and he could finally fulfill his old plan to live the life that he wanted, where he was unknown. But he had not prepared for this visit. The girl left the hut, leaving Wren and the queen alone. Wren showed the queen the empty shell. "The walnut is gone," he told her. The queen's eyes burned with fury. "You foul villain! I shall execute you with my own hands." Wren threw the shell out of the window and said calmly, "I shall come with you." The queen was about to turn away and leave the hut, but suddenly she stopped, her eyes widening in astonishment as she looked out the window. Wren looked out too, and his eyes stared in bewilderment as well. Before their eyes, there was now a tree, growing up and out. Its branches were heavy with leaves and giant, wondrous walnuts. "Impossible," the queen said, walking out of the hut. She pulled a walnut off the tree, took a rock, and cracked it open. She cut off a crumb and offered it to the old woman who had been sitting on the ground waiting for her turn. The old woman swallowed the crumb, and within a moment she stood up and approached the queen to thank her. "It works!" the queen cried out in excitement. "Mother, this is wonderful!" exclaimed the princess, who was standing outside Wren's hut, waiting anxiously for Wren and her mother. "There are enough walnuts for all the people in the kingdom. Actually, for all people in all the kingdoms." Liliel smiled at Wren and added, pleading, "Do forgive Wren. He has helped many people, and thanks to him, we discovered that the treasure was much greater than we thought." The queen was not listening to her daughter. She stood deliberating by the walnut trees, muttering to herself, "I think I discovered the secrets." She turned to her daughter in excitement. "Listen, Liliel, you were right. Peace and prosperity returned to Lansamaros after Wren left with the walnut, and all of our peace treaties were signed afterward. He used it the right way. He did something we did not." "He shared the walnut with others," Liliel said quietly. The queen turned to Wren. "Thanks to you, the walnut's secrets were revealed, and other good things happened in the kingdom that you do not even know of. You are welcome to return to Lansamaros." Liliel's eyes shone with joy. "I will not return to Lansamaros and work for you," Wren said in determination. "The pirates I used to work for were more merciful than you." "What pirates? Are you a pirate?" the queen asked in shock. "Wren?" the princess asked, waiting for an explanation. "I am no pirate," Wren said. "When I was hungry and had nothing to my name, I came across a pirate ship and worked aboard it until I reached you. I did not want to return there, but I did not want to stay with you, my queen. You are more wicked and cruel than the pirates." "What does he speak of, mother?" the princess asked. And what else do we not know about you, Wren? We can discuss that later, the Queen said. I can tell you, Wren said. We all have much to tell, the Queen said. Let us go back into the hut. She turned to her people. Pick the walnuts, she ordered. Leave half here, take the other half with you, and return to the palace. The Queen, Wren, and Princess Liliel walked into the hut and sat there speaking for several hours. The Queen told of all the years she had been busy at war with the neighboring kingdoms, and how she had always feared her subjects would rebel and thus treated them harshly. Now she understood that she must share the walnut. She spoke about the changes the kingdom had been experiencing since Wren began to share the walnut with anyone in need. Wren related what had happened to him since he lost all of his possessions, about the pirates, and about how he had been sent to find the treasure. Liliel, come with me, Wren said when he finished. Let us go on a journey throughout the world and spread the healing walnuts. The more we make haste, the fewer people will suffer. Liliel looked at her mother with alarm. The Queen said, I suppose it is time to cancel the law forbidding members of the royal family from traveling in the world. You have my blessing for your journey. Liliel hugged her mother. The Queen hugged her daughter back and bid her farewell. Chapter 12. The End. Wren and Liliel gathered a few items and a few wondrous walnuts and loaded them onto 2 horses the Queen had left behind. Then they were on their way. The Queen returned to the palace. She shared the walnuts with her people and revealed their secrets to all. The Queen and King continued to promote relations with other kingdoms and improve life in Lansameros. Soon enough, they became generous and righteous rulers. Wren and Liliel passed through villages and cities, handing out wondrous walnuts and telling of their marvels. Within a year, they returned to the kingdom of Lansameros. As they approached the palace, people waved and greeted them. That is new, Wren thought. In the past, the people would never look up when they saw the royal family. Wren and Princess Liliel remained in the kingdom and were married, and eventually became the beloved king and queen of Lansameros. And as for the pirates, before the magic of the walnuts had been revealed to the entire kingdom, they managed to sell their piece of the walnut to a greedy rich man, who was none other than Mr. Kazabi, and received for it 10 sacks of gold coins. They never had to rob anyone ever again. The end. You've been listening to The Adventures of Wren and the Magic Walnut by Radin.